stressful? Well, this this marks the midway point of the semester. So you are halfway through, most of you are halfway through your first semester in college. So this is the point where I should say finish the semester strong. Okay? You get off to a good start, you might as well finish it strong, right? Make sure you get the grades that you want to get in each of your classes. So, this is also the point where we have a posted syllabus on eCourseware. And so I wanted to talk to everybody about that a little bit. On eCourseware, right now I have the syllabus and the 2 assignments just so you can have some information on those. We'll go over the second assignment in 2 weeks. Because remember, next week is when we're going to go to Malco. So we'll go over assignment number 2 in 2 weeks. However, what would you like on eCourseware? Do you just want the bare bones where it's syllabus and 2 assignments? Or what I do in some other classes is I'll create a section of eCourseware called Additional Finds, where I just find interesting stories and I put them up there. If you would like that, like links to the videos and everything that we watch in the class, the stories that we've talked about, I could do that as well. So would you like me to post all of that information? Yeah. Okay. Keep in mind, you lose access to that at the end of the semester. Okay, so if you want that information after the semester, I don't really know how, you can't copy the page or copy eCourseware and take it with you, but make sure that you document all the stories and videos and everything that you want. Okay, so I definitely can do that. The reason we're showing this, obviously, what is the significance of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs to Disney animation? It was the first full-length animated movie they created, correct? It was also the first full-length animated movie. This was years in the making. Within a year of within a year of releasing this movie, Walt still had not decided on the names of the dwarves. And if you are interested in reading or listening to any of the history of how they made Snow White, you can read the biography I gave you at the beginning of the semester, which was also on the syllabus, about Walt Disney. He spends a lot of time in that book discussing how the process unfolded, the time that it took, some of the things behind making that movie as far as the difficulty deciding the dwarves' names, and then also some of the other issues that went into that. And the studio at that time was in a lot of financial trouble, okay? Because of this movie, because of the success of this movie, the studio was then able to move on and create other animated features. A lot of people saw this movie as something that could end Walt Disney Studios. They had gone too far out of the comfort zone, out of what they were supposed to be creating at that time. And so if you haven't seen the movie, it gets released every once in a while. You can find it on iTunes and YouTube if you have old DVDs or Blu-rays of them. To me, when I watch this movie, it's extremely interesting because, as you can see, it's not like a movie we would watch today from Disney, right? This does not look like Frozen, does it? Frozen, the technological advances in animation are a drastic, I should say, drastic in comparison to this cartoon, right? But think, when this was released in the 30s, this is the first time people would sit in a theater and see something animated like this. And the amount of time it took for each one of these frames to be created. You know, when I was growing up, I used to think that animated movies were probably easier to make, cheaper to make, than live action movies. That's not really the case. An animated movie, such as ones made by Pixar, when Pixar made Toy Story, it was something like, I want to say, maybe 6,000 to 10,000 images for a single second or 5 seconds of the movie. And the way that they filmed this was having the animated boards and then running them in front of the camera. And so when you look at some of the history behind this, it's extremely interesting to see where they started and understand the technological advancements at that time. After Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs did not win an Oscar or an Academy Award, the next year, however, Walt Disney was presented with a special Oscar for his technological advancements, and he was actually presented with 7 mini Oscar trophies, obviously for the Seven Dwarfs. So, any questions over case study number 1? Because that'll still be due next Monday, okay? You'll turn it in on eCourseware before you go over to the Malco, okay?
This isn't about the assignment. I just had a question about Snow White.
Okay.
I heard once that Snow White was the first colorized animated film too. Is that true, or were there other colorized animated movies?
I believe it was the first colorized. Well, I mean, it was the first colorized feature film, but it was also the first feature. I believe it was the first colorized because Technicolor. Has everybody heard of Technicolor? Technicolor was created not for Walt Disney and for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but it was one of the aspects that was, or early innovations that allowed Walt Disney to create Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Any other questions?
I wasn't here the last Monday that we all met, so whenever you're talking about the assignment, did y'all talk about that?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
So look at it on eCourseware,
Mm-hmm.
and then
If I have any questions, I'll just email.
yeah, just email me any questions. It's essentially you just answer the questions on eCourseware, and remember we talked about you can do it in narrative format. If you would like, you can create a video where you're discussing a 2 to 3 minute video where you're discussing the information also. Okay. So I also was showing this because, as you've seen today, is one of our sections on Disney movies. And today was supposed to be the Disney movies at the corporate level. So those are the movies that people recognize, like Snow White, Frozen, Lady and the Tramp. And we can talk about some of those. But there are also movies that people probably don't recognize. Has anyone heard of Touchstone Pictures? What's Touchstone Pictures? What movies did Touchstone Pictures create? What are some of theirs? Remember we had the list from D23. Let me pull it up real quick. So I have to log in to do that. My login is somewhere else. But Touchstone was created so that Disney, and especially when Michael Eisner took over in '84, to allow Disney to create adult content, adult movies focused toward a more adult audience. Okay, not the G animated features that Disney had been making, and then the G movies that Disney had been making. And if you've seen any of the older movies, like Pete's Dragon, how many people have seen the new Pete's Dragon? Has anybody seen the old Pete's Dragon from the 60s? So those were the type of movies that were made by the Walt Disney Corporation. So Touchstone was created to create more adult-focused features. Splash was the first adult feature or movie made under the Touchstone label. There were a series of movies that Pretty Woman, if you've ever seen Pretty Woman, was produced under the Touchstone label. So in the 80s, Walt Disney, the corporation, really started to expand the breadth of movies that they were creating. And if we pulled up the list, you would see just the massive amounts of movies that were created, especially starting in the early 80s by the Walt Disney Corporation. So I also, since we're going to be at Malco next week, I wanted to take a little bit of time to look at some of the fan films, the fan-made movies about Disney as well. So before we do that, let's open it up. Are there any questions or comments about some of the movies made by the Disney Corporation that either questions you have about them, about the making of them, comments about some of the movies you enjoyed? We can open up for questions first.
What made them want to start making adult films which would steer them like the children's films?
Well, and I want to be clear, they weren't steering away from children's films, but at the time when Michael Eisner took over, he was at Paramount before he was at Disney. So when he became CEO and chairman of the board at Disney, they started talking about, one, animation had kind of fallen off at that time. Animation in general wasn't as popular as it had been. Animation at Disney had also fallen off. There's a great, at that time, some of the animated movies that the Disney Corporation was creating didn't receive the critical acclaim or the commercial acclaim that they were looking for. And so basically it was a way to bring in more money. A lot of people, in particular at that time, had thought, Disney was for kids. Once you reached a certain age, you probably stopped watching many Disney movies because they were G-rated or they were animated. And so this was essentially a way just to open up Disney to a new demographic, new age demographic. Any other questions? So then one thing I will talk about with the Disney Corporation movies that's happened more recently is when Pixar was founded, and there's a link to an audiobook on the syllabus if you want to read about Pixar. One of the books is called To Pixar and Beyond. There's another book, I can't remember the exact title now, written about Pixar and in particular Steve Jobs their involvement in Pixar. But when Pixar was created, the Steve Catmull and some of the creators of Pixar came from the University of Utah, where the University of Utah had the cutting edge computer generated or computer animation software at that time. And so in the late 70s, early 80s, Pixar started to, they formed a corporation when it was purchased by Steve Jobs. That's when it received the Pixar name. And they started to create these short cartoons for Pixar. And so we looked at the Pixar website last time, but here are some of the animated short films. And so if you go to Pixar.com, you can look at all these short films. One that's probably the most well-known is Luxo Jr., about a parent and child Luxo lamp, where the story goes, or the cartoon goes, that the child comes in and he's bouncing on a ball, the rubber ball right there, which looks pretty familiar if you're a Pixar fan, right? And then he pops the ball. The father comes in and, sort of looks somewhat dejected at the kid. And then a bigger ball comes along for the kid to play with. And so let me see. Here is Luxo Jr. So you look at how the cord moves. These were all innovations for computer generated animation. So, this was created in 1986, or released in 1986. You can see a few things from this, just the amount of innovation, technological advancements from this short, but also the ball looks familiar, right? It appears in all the Pixar movies. The Luxo lamp looks familiar, right? Where's the Luxo lamp? Other places it appears.
Every time before a Pixar movie, when it shows the Pixar logo, it has that lamp that jumps on the eye.
Yeah. You ever think why it jumps on the eye?
So that's where it came from.
It's also back to Luxo Jr. when he's jumping on the ball, and the ball deflates, so the eye deflates or disappears, and then the lamp looks up, almost surprised, right? Additionally, in Toy Story, remember when Woody accidentally knocks Buzz Lightyear out of the window? What does he get knocked over by? A Luxo lamp. And so the things that that Pixar did appear throughout most, if not all, of their cartoons or all of their animated features. There's also another story or another short that John Lasseter and his team did was Red's Dream. Excuse me, and another about Tin Toy. If you're watching Toy Story, at the beginning in Andy's room, when the toys are talking and meeting before their, before their employee meeting, you look on the bookshelf, and the bookshelf has Tin Toy as a book, and it also has, I believe, Luxo Jr. and Red's Dream. And so there are these little cookies or references to all of their cartoons and their animated shorts within their featured films. Also, the starting place for Genesis for Toy Story really came from from Tin Toy. Tin Toy was about a wind-up toy that came to life and thought about what else he wanted to do with his life and with his being and things like that. That was the genesis for the movies or the Toy Story franchise. When Toy Story was being created in the late 80s and early 90s, Pixar signed a distribution deal with Disney when about 2 years before the movie was released, Pixar showed an early version of Toy Story to Disney. Disney said they didn't like it. They almost pulled the plug on the whole project. Pixar went back and they revamped the story and they made it into a buddy film. So the buddy film's like 48 hours. And the films where you would have the two co-stars being very different from each other, and then at the end having to overcome their differences. And so that was obviously the end, or how Toy Story ended up. Another interesting fact about Finding Nemo is one of the producers of Finding Nemo told a story that he was feeling guilty for not spending enough time with his kid. He was at the office all the time. And so he wanted to take his kid to the park. And on the way to the park, he said he just kept telling his kid, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And he said he had the realization that, I'm ruining this time for my kid. I could be having fun with him, and yet I'm telling him to be careful and not do this, don't touch this, and don't touch that. Sounds familiar, right? That's the Marlin character in Finding Nemo. And so a bunch of cool things that Pixar did that show up in a lot of their animated features. Now, the story behind why Pixar was purchased by Disney goes when Pixar first approached Disney. John Lasseter used to be an animator at Walt Disney Corporation. When he was fired, he joined on with Pixar. And when they would approach the Disney Corporation about a partnership or even having Disney purchase Pixar, Disney wasn't interested. And so, in many ways, Pixar created these shorts like Red's Dream, Knick Knack, Luxo Jr. and Luxo Jr. 2 to show Disney what they could do. Pixar was also making some animated sequences for movies like Star Trek 2. There's a clip in there where they're looking at I believe they call it the Genesis Project, where they take it's a video that shows a dead star, that they shoot a beam into. The star fills with life. Pixar created that 90-second clip of the world of the planet, or the star becoming a planet and becoming filled with fruitation and things like that. So when Pixar would approach Disney, Disney wasn't interested, and in particular, the story goes, Michael Eisner was not interested. And instead of purchasing Pixar, they decided to make a deal where Pixar would produce 3 films and it would be distributed under the Disney name. So that's why Toy Story was distributed in 1995. Second was A Bug's Life. Based on the popularity of Toy Story, Disney wanted to create a sequel to Toy Story. However, they didn't want it to count as part of their 3-film deal. So at that time, Steve Jobs and Pixar started to, and Ed Catmull, started to renegotiate their terms, and they ended up with a 6-film deal that lasted into the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, the relationship between Michael Eisner and Steve Jobs apparently got so contentious that Steve Jobs called off all negotiations with Disney and started looking at other studios in which to either distribute their animated films through to partnership or to sell to. When Michael Eisner left the company on the backs of a revolt led by Roy E. Disney, the nephew of Walt Disney, Michael Eisner ended up stepping down September 30th, 2004. October 1st, 2005 is when the current CEO, Bob Iger, took over at Disney. Now, you've probably seen Bob Iger make some news recently with announcing his retirement next year once his contract runs out, and then also surrounding some of the controversy with Steve Lasseter, who was at Pixar and Pixar Disney now, and some of the claims being made against him. And then also Miramax. Disney used to own Miramax and used to work with the Weinstein brothers. So in that controversy as well, Bob Iger's had to make statements on those. But when he took over in 2005, they revamped the talks between Pixar and Disney, which ultimately led to, in May 2006, Disney announcing the purchase of Pixar, which made John Lasseter now the creative director of Pixar and Disney Animation, and is what essentially pushed Steve Jobs into the multi-billionaire realm. After that, Steve Jobs left. He went back to Apple, started creating, they started releasing the first iPhones, and leading up to what happened with Steve Jobs when he passed away, what's led on to Apple since then. So, also in 2011, Disney purchased the Marvel universe, right? They did that in an attempt to bring in kind of the teenage demographic, teenage to young adult, especially male demographic. And what they envisioned was bringing in the Marvel universe and being able to tell stories around it, much like the Disney Corporation can do with the Disney Princesses franchise and all of the characters that are included in the Disney Princess franchises. And then 2013, it was announced that Disney would buy or purchase Lucasfilm, which was the creator of Star Wars. And so that's why you've seen now, starting in 2015, every year there's been a new Star Wars movie that's coming out. So this past December of Star Wars Episode 8, May 25th, it'll be Solo, a Star Wars story. And so what Disney did with the Star Wars franchise is they said they would finish the original 9 episodes, and then they want to create these standalone movies, which is what Rogue One was, and which is what Solo will be. They have also announced that they want to do a new trilogy separate from the 9 stories that have been told already. Just this past week, they announced that Jon Favreau was going to direct and produce a live action television series around Star Wars for the Disney streaming service that'll start in 2019. So Disney has made all of these acquisitions to primarily bring in a different and older demographic. So whereas people used to think of Disney as just being children focused, and once you're a certain age, you don't go to Walt Disney, or you don't watch Walt Disney pictures, you don't go to Walt Disney World or Disneyland, you're going to Universal, or you're going to these other places that have more thrill-centric rides and attractions. Disney counteracted those perceptions with purchasing things like Pixar. Now they can use Pixar in their theme parks. They're building opening a Toy Story land in Hollywood Studios. They're opening Pixar Pier and Disneyland's California Adventure. They're opening a Marvel land in Disneyland Paris. They're opening a Star Wars land, or Galaxy's Edge, in Disneyland and Walt Disney World Hollywood Studios. And so they're able to do that to attract an older demographic, not only to the movies and the box office, but also attract them to their theme parks. So that's why that's what's behind a lot of the more recent acquisitions from the Disney Corporation. Questions?
When you say
I'm sorry.
What is the name of the type of animation that was used in Toy Story and this video right here? Is there a name for that kind of animation?
Well, the name that's commonly used is just computer generated animation. Pixar did things like RenderMan. Is that what you're talking about? RenderMan was a software. It was the computer generated software that corporations could use.
Yeah.
And then also, Pixar was known for their commercials as well. Does anyone remember the late 90s, the Listerine commercials, where the Listerine bottle would jump around and he looked like a knight? The Pixar Corporation did things like that.
The reason I'm asking is because this kind of animation is obviously different from like Snow White animation.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking. So the reason I asked is because is this like short video with Luxo Jr. like the first ever like video that incorporated that new animation that Pixar did?
The first one that was solely for this purpose. Now, as I said, Pixar had made some computer animated backgrounds or computer animated scenes for other movies. However, yes, this was the first solely for animation entertainment, if you will.
One more thing, at the beginning when it showed that the Pixar logo, I
Mhm.
think that was the original Pixar logo. I think that was really cool.
Mhm.
That,
The square?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's like, I think that's really cool, like original Pixar logo.
And that's what their logo was when they were doing RenderMan. And Pixar still, to my knowledge, still sells RenderMan every once in a while now. It's used on, they had the products they created would be used like in Jurassic Park, the first Jurassic Park, to create the dinosaurs and things like that. But yeah, that was the logo that they were using early on to sell these products.
whenever you said something about that streaming service, do you mean like a website kinda, or like a whole new Disney channel or something like that?
So to my knowledge, it's going to be a Netflix or Hulu, and it's there to try and rival like Netflix.
They're gonna-
So Disney products are going to be taken off Netflix. They're going to be shown on this streaming service. The ESPN streaming service is supposed to start later this year, and then the Disney specific streaming service is going to start next year. Now, what is so interesting with this is, remember at the beginning of the semester we talked about Disney making an acquisition, or making the acquisition of Fox, right? Fox owns, I believe, 30 to 40% stake in Hulu, which is another streaming service. So I don't know if this acquisition, part of this acquisition was trying to purchase stake in Hulu, where they can control some of the content on Hulu. Maybe try to rebrand some of it into the Disney streaming service. I don't know. But then within the last 3 weeks, Comcast has announced they want to buy Sky Sports, which is a part of the Fox deal with Disney. And so now there's some kind of corporate rivalry going on. What's going to happen between ultimately Comcast, Fox, and Disney? But yeah, it would be like a streaming service like Amazon is. Any other questions? And to answer one more question or address one more thing on Pixar, the first computer-generated image to appear in a Disney film was in The Little Mermaid. The last scene of The Little Mermaid, when you see the sunset and the ship sailing away and the mermen and merwomen are all waving out of the ocean, that was computer generated. So that was the first time that Disney used the Pixar, or had Pixar design something for one of their animated features. And then things like, based on the popularity of Pixar, and the popularity of Cars, which Cars was released in 2006. It was the first Pixar movie to be released following the Disney acquisition. Based on the popularity of that movie and other movies, Disney started to create their own computer-generated, or release their own computer-generated features, such as Planes, if anyone's seen that, Planes, Fire and Rescue. They also released Dinosaur, which if you've been to Animal Kingdom, there's now a ride focused around Dinosaur. And so Disney ultimately decided, instead of trying to compete with kind of the trendsetter like Pixar, it was better to try to acquire and work with Pixar on those features. So another thing that I want to spend some time on is, well, I guess a final point on this. I saw this morning. This is a sneak peek of Toy Story Land at Hollywood Studios and Pixar Pier at Disney's California Adventure. So this is a walkthrough of Toy Story Land. Here's Pixar Pier at California Adventure. It would be the Incredibles. Remember, they're taking the California Screamin' roller coaster, rebranding it as a Incredibles roller coaster. Here's the Slinky Dog coaster in Hollywood Studios. Pixar Pier opens June 23rd. Toy Story Land opens June 30th. So, and these also coincide with they're making a Toy Story 4. Same as if anyone has been to or seen videos of Pandora, the world of Avatar, they're creating more Avatar movies. So 7 or 8 years after the original Avatar movie, the land opens, they're going to create more of these movies. So another thing I want to talk to you today about is the fan films. One measure of popularity is fans creating their own content around your stories. We've seen it with writers like Jane Austen. We've seen it with the Star Wars universe, where people will create their own fan-made stories with these characters. And so Disney's no different. And so I want to look at 2 previews of fan-made films. And one we talked about when Ron Schneider talked to us. This is The Further Adventures of Walt's Frozen Head. And this one is about an employee of Walt Disney World who is, everyone's heard the story that Walt Disney, because of his interest in technological advancements, everyone's heard the story he was cryogenically frozen, right? It's not true. But this story goes that the Walt Disney Corporation could not cryogenically freeze his whole body. They could only freeze his head. And so his head is kept in the utilidors underneath Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World. Because if you remember, Walt Disney World was being designed when Walt Disney himself died. So he's never gotten to see the Magic Kingdom. And so he talks an employee of Walt Disney World to take him around the Magic Kingdom and some of the Walt Disney World parks. And so here is the trailer, and this one is the one Ron was saying has not been released yet.
We're not taking you up there. See about that.
Real quickly, did you see that first scene? It said the man in the forest. What's that from? Does anybody know that line, man in the forest? It's from Bambi, to signify that man is the real threat to wildlife. So the characters in Bambi, if there was a hunter or anyone in the forest, they say man in the forest, they would all know to hide. Also, when Bambi was being created, the animators at the Disney Corporation started saying man in the forest when Walt Disney would walk into the hall because of the pressure that the studio was facing, and some of the confrontations he would have with some of the animators. And so that's a throwback to that. This was made without the permission or knowledge of the Disney Corporation.
It's actually
We have a steamboat leak at Pie Island. Late 1890s making a straw hat.
I have a house, I just don't live there right now.
Look, I know weekends are like divorced dad penance or whatever. We have sorcerer, but really, Dad,
Separated. Over here. Thank God you heard me.
So that is Ron Schneider,
The
as he
Johnny
said.
Depp one was good. Surreal.
Take your finger off my nose.
I didn't see anything.
If you give me one day in the Magic Kingdom, you'll be running every gift shop, hop stand, and souvenir cart in all of Disney.
we have the 1939 design and the 1955 design.
Now I'm a tourist.
Peter, I'm kind of on the schedule here.
6-figure salary.
Yours.
And not like low 6 figures either. I'm talking like mid 6 figures.
Walt Disney is in our house.
I used to know and approve everything that went on around here. Now, I don't even know the color of that hat shop.
I don't know, we need to something a little less conspicuous.
Well, sir, I do remember you saying that you wanted to see the park through the eyes of a child.
This isn't what I meant, and you know it. It's blue.
What is it?
The hat shop. It's painted baby blue. Peter, you know, you can't hold on to things forever. People grow up, they change. They're not yours anymore.
Okay, so you're carrying the leader of the world's largest media conglomerate, so
you know, be careful.
So be on the lookout.
I have a question about Mr. Disney.
What is it?
Well, it's a little delicate. How does he still draw Mickey Mouse?
So be on the lookout for when that is released. As Ron said, they're trying to release it or trying to get into some film festivals to release this, and then hopefully be able to release it in some theaters across the country, and then release it online. So that's somewhat a kind of lighthearted look at Walt Disney World, and plays on, you know, the kind of interesting story of Walt Disney and his technological interests. Here is a somewhat darker view of Disney World. So we will watch the trailer from Escape from Tomorrow, and then there's a brief interview with the director of Escape from Tomorrow. So here's the trailer first. This also was made without the knowledge of Walt Disney World.
People come here because they want to feel safe. Bad things happen everywhere, especially here. I can't be happy all the time.
Something's wrong with Elliot.
There's something going on here. It's this place.
You're inside my head.
You've got quite an imagination. Just like old Double D himself.
Daddy, let's go home.
So this is available now. As you can see, you can watch it on YouTube. You can rent it through YouTube. I think you can also watch it on iTunes if you want. Here is a brief interview with the director of Escape from Tomorrow when it was released in 2013.
Getting a lot of buzz, not only for its plot, but also because of where it was shot, inside Disney World without permission. We're going to meet the director in just a moment, but first, here's NBC's Gabe Gutierrez.
It's known as the happiest place on earth, where magical movies come to life. But this is not your typical Disney experience.
How often do you get to go sneak into the biggest theme park in the world and shoot a movie?
That was fun.
It's called Escape from Tomorrow.
Did that seem normal to you?
What do you mean?
The story of a frustrated father who starts losing grip on reality during a family vacation to Disney World.
We went there every morning and we, waited for the park to open.
Writer-director Randy Moore and his crew used handheld digital cameras to secretly shoot the scenes, guerrilla style, inside Disneyland and Disney World, never asking the Walt Disney Company for permission. On the movie's website, a timer is counting how long it takes until the filmmakers get sued. Disney declined to comment to NBC News.
They don't want to let this movie have the benefit of a fight with a big company like Disney.
After premiering at the Sundance Film Festival, it opened in 32 cities on Friday to mixed reviews.
The better chance for this film is that it becomes one of those cult films that real people who love movies find and watch for years to come.
Daddy!
Hey! A social critique that has audiences talking not about Mickey, but the darker side of Disney. For today, Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News, Atlanta.
Randy Moore is the writer and director of Escape from Tomorrow. Good morning. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
So what did Mickey Mouse ever do to you?
Well, I went there religiously as a kid. I was a big fan. My father lived in Orlando, so I would go down there and visit him every summer, and we had a great time.
But where did the vision come from,
really
the idea of a horror film?
Until I went back as an adult with my own kids, and my wife, who's not from the U.S., went there for the first time, and just had an awful, awful experience.
Why? Because it is, in many ways, it's a very stressful experience for a lot of families.
And she didn't have the nostalgia to fall back on that, you know, I had and so many other people had. So, you know, I actually remember getting upset with her at first for, you know, like, how could you not, you know, love this place? But then I started seeing it through her eyes, and I kind of saw the cracks in the veneer.
So there's the vision, but there's just the backstory, right? That is taking over. How did you pull this off? Because you were there secretly.
Well, fortunately, cameras are pretty ubiquitous at Disney. Everyone has them, and we were shooting with the same consumer cameras that other people have. We didn't do any special modifications or anything, so we just went in there like tourists and shot every day.
But you'd actually rehearse with the actors before?
We'd rehearse in my hotel room every morning, and then we block it as best as we could. We walked the whole movie with the camera crew about 9 times before we ever brought actors into the park to do it. So we were pretty meticulous about our shooting.
Any close calls in terms of getting caught?
Towards the end, there was a moment when they thought our crew were paparazzi following a celebrity couple around, and they pulled them off to the side, and they asked, you know, are you celebrities? And they said no, and said, wait right here. At that point, the kids, they were so smart, they said they needed to go to the bathroom, and they said, okay, take your kids to the bathroom, and when you're done, come right back here. So they went to the bathroom, they removed their sound equipment, and when they came back, as fate would have it, a parade was coming by Main Street that separated them from the security personnel.
All right, Randy Moore.
So, a little bit darker view of Walt Disney World. But again, so, you know, as I said, a sign of popularity and widespread popularity is fans taking on some of the characters or places, like in this Disney World in both of these movies, and creating their own content. And so next time we will look for an email from me today. I am going to, when I got on to purchase the tickets last week, there were some difficulties in scheduling and everything, so I'm going to purchase them, try to today, and look for an email from me. I'll let you know the time and where we need to meet. We'll just meet in the lobby of Malco. Okay? Any questions? All right. Have a good week. See everyone Monday.